You know, one of the burdens that I've had on my heart ever since I became a Christian was to remove some of the misconceptions that people have about God. That perhaps has been one of the greatest things that I've been blessed with over the years, coming to understand God better. We all are aware that Jesus said that eternal life means what? This is life eternal, John 17 and verse 3. And this is life eternal, that they may know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom thou hast sent. I mean, I would ask all of you, if you are serious about Christianity, you're serious about salvation, to ask the question, do I know God? And I don't mean do you know about God, because a lot of people can give you the theory, but do you know God? And one of the things that is necessary in order to know God is to form a right conception of his character. I'm going to start by sharing some hard things, or asking you some hard questions. I like to do that because sometimes you don't appreciate the answer until you first of all look at the problem. So I want to look at the problem. Howard mentioned it, but I'm going to go in more in depth. The brutal judgments of the Old Testament. I use the word brutal because I can hardly use any other word. Recently, a group of us started reading the Bible again. We started from Genesis and we are going through. And although I've read through this so many times, for some reason, now I'm reading and I'm seeing these things like I never saw before. All these killings, all this meticulous, exacting behavior on the part of God and those who represented him. One example I can think of is Jephthah's vow. Now all of you know that Jephthah made a vow to God. He said, if you help me to win the battle, the first thing that comes out of my house when I get back home, I will offer it to you for a burnt offering. When he got back home, his daughter came out of the house. Now, from my present perspective and my present situation, I would say, I'm sure God didn't give me that answer. I would say, Lord, I didn't mean it. Or something like that. But the Bible says, he told it to his daughter, and the daughter said, allow me to go 30 days on the mountains to bewail my virginity, and then you can do whatever you said you would do. Some people say he never really killed his daughter. Some Bible students, they say what he did was she remained a virgin for the rest of her life. But I think that is more wishful thinking. When I read the Bible, I don't see any indication of that. I tend to believe that he actually went through and offered his daughter for a burnt offering like he promised. Now, this is how they related to God in the Old Testament. Some of the behavior is so terrible that when you read it, you want to cringe. I look at a few more examples. Achan's golden wedge. Okay, they were fighting a war. The Israelites went up against, was it Ai? All right. Now, this man, Achan, no, it was when they conquered Jericho. Achan found a goodly Babylonish garment and a wedge of gold, and he took it and hid it under the floor of his tent. Now, two things, okay? First of all, the next battle they were to fight, they were to go up against Ai, a small town. And they said, look here, man, this is a bit of cheese. This is a piece of cheese, piece of cake. We don't need everybody to go. Just send 3,000. They sent 3,000 people against Ai, and they got a beating. 300 Israelites were killed. Now, clearly, God is the one who allowed this to happen. Because immediately they got the beating, Joshua said something is wrong. Something is wrong. And they started to investigate, and they found out that Achan had, when the lots fell on Achan, and they said, confess what you have done. And he said, well, I saw a goodly Babylonish garment and a wedge of gold, and I hid it under my tent. And Joshua said, you have troubled Israel, and the Lord will trouble you. And they stoned Achan and his family to death. And the next time they went against Ai, they won. So, God, you have to say, God, you see, how did they know something was wrong? Because nobody could stand against them. So the moment they got a beating, they realized something was wrong. So the fact that they got a beating was the doing of God. God allowed 300 Israelites to die because of one man. And from our present understanding of God, we say, man, that is injustice. That is not fair. That is unreasonable. Why would he do something like that? And yet when you look at the Bible, you can't get away from it. You look at Canaan. I have some references there you can look at if you want. But I call it the genocidal invasion of Canaan. If you want, you go to read Joshua 10, verses 28 to 42. It tells you about 10 cities in succession that they attacked. And it says they killed everything that breathed. Not even a sheep was allowed to live. Everything that had breath, they killed it. They slaughtered man, woman, child, baby. Everything they killed. Everything. And they were doing it on the instructions of God. I give you another one. Saul's vow. Okay? Here's a strange story. You know, the Israelites were being harassed by the Philistines. They were persecuted by the Philistines. And so Saul, there was a kind of standoff, right? Saul had a few soldiers. The Philistines were like the sands of the sea. And so Saul was there trying to plan strategy. And Jonathan and his armor bearer went over to look at the Philistines, and they were up on top of a place. And Jonathan said, in one of the most amazing acts of faith, Jonathan said to his armor bearer, come, let's show ourselves to the Philistines. And if they say, stay there and we will come, let's not take them on, because then we are going to be beaten. But if they say, come up here, we're going to go up there because God has given us the victory. 2 men against hundreds of thousands. And he says, if they say, come up here, we are going up there. So they showed themselves, and the Philistines said, look, the Hebrews have come out of the holes where they were hiding. Come up here and we will show you that thing. And they said there were two stones there. Boses, and even the stones had names. I think it was Boses and Jachin and Boaz, something like that. But they climbed up these stones and they got to the top. And when they got up there, Jonathan and his armor bearer stood back to back, and they started to slaughter. And they said the first slaughter was about a half an acre space. They killed 20 men. Saul and the others were under a tree, and they saw the uproar up there, and they decided to find out who was missing. And then the noise was growing greater, and they decided to go run. They ran to see, and then they saw what was happening. They joined in the battle. There was a great victory for Israel that day. But what happened? Saul said, if anybody eats anything today, he will be killed. Saul was kind of stupid that kind of way, right? But he thinks he's being wonderful, and he's making this great vow for God. Anybody eats anything today, he's going to be killed, okay? So they're beating the Philistines, and Jonathan sees a honeycomb. He pushes the end of his rod in the honeycomb and just suck a little honey. All right? So, that night, Saul says, we don't want the Philistines to get away. Maybe we should pursue them during the night. So let's ask God if we should continue pursuing them. They call the priest and they ask God, shall we pursue? And God does not answer. And Saul said, something is wrong. Somebody has done something wrong, and they begin to cast lots, and finally it falls on Jonathan. And Saul says, what did you do? He said, I only took a little honey and now I must die. And Saul says, Jonathan, you shall surely die. Now the people rose up and they said, no, Jonathan shall not die, who wrought this great victory today. And they delivered Jonathan from Saul. But the point I'm making is, how did they know something was wrong? Because God did not answer. God did not answer because Jonathan did something that he didn't even know about. He wasn't there when Saul made this oath, and yet he put his staff, took a little honey, and God didn't answer based on the oath that Saul made. When you read these things, when I read these things in the past, I'm saying, what on earth does this mean? Why does God respect a stupid oath like this? And why is he concerned that Jonathan took a little honey? Because Jonathan wasn't there when Saul made this oath. So how does that affect Jonathan? Why doesn't God answer Saul? Why is God behaving like this? Here's another one. David. 2 Samuel chapter 24. David, in a moment of stupidity, sent Joab to number Israel, to take a census. Now, I'm not sure why it was so wrong to take a census. I tried to find out. I haven't really seen any place in the Bible where God says, don't take a census. But I think he might be saying, if you take a census, you are trying to say that the strength of Israel lies in numbers. When you start thinking that strength is in numbers, you stop having faith in God. So I think that was why it was wrong. But David sent, they tried to persuade him not to do it, but he was the king, so they went and they took the census. And it says, when they came back, David's heart smote him. He's sorry. He's sorry that he took this census. And he goes to God to confess and to ask forgiveness. And God sends the prophet, I think it was Nathan. And God says, I'm going to give you 3 things that you choose as punishment for what you did. The first thing, I'm going to be beaten before your enemies for 3 months. The second thing, to have famine in the land for 3 years. And the third thing was the plague. Or to let the plague come in the land. All right? Famine for 3 years. Plague in the land. Beaten before your enemies for 3 months. Because David numbered the people. And David says, I'm in a great strait. I don't know what to do. It's better I fall into the hand of God than into the hand of man. You are God and you choose. You know what God chose? God chose pestilence, right? You know what happened? 70,000 Israelites died. 70,000. And then David saw the pestilence. He says, God, let the blame fall on me and my house. These sheep, what have they done? And the prophet told him to go and offer a sacrifice in the threshing floor of Ornan and the Jebusite, because the angel was standing there with his sword over the threshing floor. And so he went and offered the sacrifice there, and the plague was stayed. Now, it's not so amazing when you find that people who read these stories, they come to different conclusions, right? I'm asking as a Christian, why all these killings? Why is God so exacting, almost like he's mindless? I mean, I hope I don't sound disrespectful. I don't mean to be. But I'm saying, looking at it as an impartial, unbiased person, this is how it seems. And this is one of the hardest parts of the Bible to read and to understand. One of the hardest parts. And it has given me a lot of difficulty for a long time, because people come up with different explanations, but I never heard any that really satisfied me completely. These judgments, I could use these words to express them. Uncompromising, okay? You don't give a man any room to move, right? Look, if God says, step 5 inches and you step 5.5, you're gone. You have to be exact. That's how I see the Old Testament. It's harsh. Because people die. And people suffer. And sometimes it doesn't even seem like it matters that they are innocent. Like these 70,000 people. What did they do? Okay, but 70,000 died. It seems to be brutal, because at times the sentence is to stone a person to death. Right? Achan, it wasn't the only one who died, but his family died too. Merciless in many cases. I mean, these are the words that come to mind when I'm reading some of these things. I'm going to say, there seems to be little difference between these genocidal acts and the present-day actions of ISIS. You know the only difference? The Old Testament was more brutal than ISIS. More brutal. It was more brutal than ISIS. Because when they attacked a city in the Old Testament times, nothing that breathes was allowed to live. ISIS will kill off the men and whatever, and they will execute some. But I'm telling you, when the Hebrews went through, nothing that had breath was allowed to live. It was complete genocide. And it was at the instructions of God. The God of the Old Testament seems to be no different from Allah. And, in the past, I said to somebody when I was having a discussion with somebody and they spoke to me about how the God is brutal. And I said, look here. My religion is not the Old Testament. I'm a Christian. If you want to know where my religion comes from, go look at Jesus Christ. That's what I said, okay? And at the moment, that was the best answer I had. And, I took refuge there because I understand that there's a great difference between what we see in the New Testament and what we see in the Old Testament. But I know that everything is the Word of God. So how to explain it is what I had a difficulty with. Now, I'm going to show you something else. Interesting and related. Death sentences. Now, here's something we all can say amen to. He that smiteth a man so that he die shall be surely put to death. Amen. Even although in some countries, maybe in Europe and some parts of America, the death sentence has been abolished. Okay? But I think most of us would... Well, it's not abolished here yet, but the difficulty in getting a person to be sentenced to die, it's so difficult that they have not hanged anybody for more than 20 years because of the Privy Council in England. Because when a murderer appeals to the Privy Council, which is the final court of appeal, they say the only basis on which somebody can be sentenced to die is if it is extremely horrendous and unusual circumstances. And I think there was a case where a man cut up another man in small pieces. And he appealed to the Privy Council and they said that was not horrendous enough. So they have stopped hanging people because you can't get a conviction from the final court, which is the Privy Council. So anyway, God said, he that smites a man so that he die shall be surely put to death. And here's one we might agree with too. Bestiality. Exodus 22 and verse 19 says, if a man lie with a beast or with a woman, he is to be killed. And the beast is to be killed too. The animal is to be killed and the man is to be killed. All right, we might say, well, that's kind of harsh. I know that in Jamaica, if they catch a man in that kind of thing, they might give him a beating. Okay? If the community catches somebody in that kind of situation, they might give him a beating. But certainly, nobody will say, kill him. But God said, kill him. Sodomy. Well, I know a lot of Jamaicans will say, yes, they need to die. But in most of the world, it's perfectly normal. And the death sentence seems harsh and excessive because somebody practices this perversion. God said it, okay? Witchcraft, we might say, well, some of these we are looking at, I think we might partially agree, okay, yes, the death sentence is adultery. Yes. All right, yes. Well, today, a lot of people would die. A lot of Christians too would die, or professing Christians. Blaspheming God's name. Death, Leviticus 24 and verse 10. But here are a few others now that I ask you to consider. If a man curses his mother or father, he's to die. Man, sometimes somebody makes a little mistake and get upset and say a few hard words to his parents. Then afterwards he feels a little regretful. God said if it happened, he was to die. It says he was not to be allowed to continue for another moment. The parents themselves were to be the first one to put their hand against him. Idolatry, I think we mentioned that already. Sabbath breaking. My goodness. You did long time. All right. And the question I'm asking is, why was God so harsh? Why were these sentences so uncompromising? When they came to Mount Sinai, you remember? God says anybody that touches it, even a cow touched it, he was to be shot with an arrow. He was to be shot with a dart. Nothing that touched the mountain was to be allowed to live. So if you touch it and it didn't shock you to death, why do you have to be killed? Carelessness in restraining your animal. If you had a cow that used to buck, and you didn't keep in the cow and the cow bucked somebody and killed the person, the cow was to be killed and you were to be killed. So carelessness was also something that resulted in a death sentence. Now, I've looked at these things because you see, if you don't understand why God, why this is happening, you end up with a confused idea of what do you call it? Schizophrenic? A schizophrenic God. Or a bipolar God. When you have two faces, what do they call it? Okay. All right, but he has this beautiful face in the New Testament and this terrible face in the Old Testament. What is going on? Now Christians have tried to answer these questions in different ways. They say all these people were unsavable. They say that all those who suffered these judgments in the Old Testament, God knew that none of them could be saved. And that's why he just told them to kill everybody, because they already gone too far to be saved. I take that with several grains of salt. Because you can't tell me that those children that were killed, those little babies, you can't tell me that the Israelites couldn't rear them and raise some of them to be godly people. You can't tell me that. You can't tell me that the animals that they killed were so totally without use, you had to just kill off everything. You can't tell me that of the 70,000 that died when the plague came over Israel, they were worse than all the others. No. I don't accept the idea that all these people were unsavable. Furthermore, I don't believe God acts on the basis of his foreknowledge, right? If God acts on the basis of his foreknowledge, this controversy doesn't need to continue, because God knows who is going to be saved and who is going to be lost. Just kill off the last ones and take the rest of us, right? There's no need to go through all this formality. If God behaves that way in one case, behave that way all the time. He knows everything. Just get rid of those who he knows are going to be lost and end the stress. But he does not operate like that. He gives everybody an open opportunity. He's fair and just in everything he does. We understand. So he doesn't work like that. That answer does not satisfy. Yes, so they say he was acting on foreknowledge. No. They say, of course, a lot of people, even Christians are now saying a lot of these stories were fictitious. Okay, they are desperately trying to find an answer, and that is where they go. But I don't think any of us who believe that the Bible is the Word of God, any of us who sees how Jesus respected the Old Testament and quoted it, we can't come to that conclusion. Jesus always quoted the Bible, and the only Bible he had was the Old Testament. So he himself testifies that this is the Word of God. They were not fictitious. Well, there are some brethren who believe that God never kills. And what they say is that Satan did these things and God took the blame. All right? God. They say God took the blame, Satan did it, and God took the blame. So I just mentioned these because I want to show you how people have attempted to explain this very difficult situation. How do you look at what happened and how do you accept it? Now, let me ask a question. What would you say is the greatest teaching method in the Bible? Method. Parables. Parables. Every place you go in the Bible, you find parables. They're always telling parables. And Jesus was the ultimate parable teller. They are always telling parables. Now, in Matthew 13 and verse 34, it says, all these things spake Jesus unto the multitude in parables, and without a parable spake he not unto them. He's always using parables. It was his favorite method. What is a parable? Well, people have different ways of phrasing it, but some say a parable is like an allegory. Okay, you have seen this, you have read the story of the tortoise and the hare, turtle and the hare, and it's a story, right? It's an allegory. And what is the point of this story? The race is not for the swift, but for the one who endures. But to make the point, what they do is tell you a story about a rabbit and a turtle. And you know that this story has a point behind it, and you look for the point of the story, okay? But you don't accept the story as necessarily literal. Some people say that a parable is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. Here you have the story of the prodigal son. It's a story about a father whose son went away. You know the story, right? But when you read the story, you understand that the point of the story is not about human emotions and feelings. But what is the point? It's about God and how God feels about us, right? It's about how God feels about us when we drift away from him, and how he's longing to have us back, and how he welcomes us back with open arms and full acceptance. That's the point of the story. It's an earthly story with a heavenly meaning or a spiritual meaning. Brother Bill, I was talking about this at Albion some time ago, and Brother Bill used this phrase, and I liked it. He said it is a codified lesson. A parable is a codified lesson. And I thought this illustration would do, because look at these things that are on this screen. It's confusing, okay? But all of these are just ideas put in symbols. Isn't that right? Yeah. But if you understand the symbols and the ideas, you can do a great deal with this confused thing that is here, right? But you have to understand the coding. You have to understand what these numbers mean, and when they are put in certain relationship with each other, what they mean. It's a codified meaning, which means that there is a deeper meaning behind what you are looking at. I hated algebra, okay? I used to like geometry because I can see the pictures, but algebra, these abstract things, yeah. I just couldn't learn the formulas and all that, so I had a hard time with algebra when I was in school. But because it just has symbols that mean something else, I couldn't bother to learn it, so I never could do algebra well, because I didn't understand the code, or I wouldn't learn the code, okay? So, a parable is a codified lesson, I would say. Parables were not necessarily true. Here's one. A lot of people don't believe Jesus ever said anything that wasn't true. But it's interesting, Jesus told a story that was not true. If you believe it was true, well, we can talk afterwards. But he says in Luke 16, verses 22 and 23, and it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried, and in hell he lift up his eyes, being in torment, and seeth Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom. It's very clear that this is not a true story. When people die, they don't go to Abraham's bosom. When people die, they don't go to hell. And even if there were a hell, you couldn't stay there and see people up in Lazarus, in Abraham's bosom. So, it's a story, and it has a meaning. And sometimes people miss the meaning. The meaning of the story, Jesus wanted to tell them, let people listen to Moses and the prophets. If they don't listen to them, they won't even hear if somebody comes back from the dead. That's the point he's making. But he tells a complicated story to make his point. And we understand that this story is not a true story. What we do is look for the point behind the story. Isn't that right? And the Bible is very much like that. Some parables were lived. Did you know that? Here's one interesting one. In Isaiah 20, verses 2 to 4. It says, at that same time spake the Lord by Isaiah, the son of Amos, saying, go and loose the sackcloth from off thy loins, and put off thy shoe from thy foot. And he did so, walking naked and barefoot. And the Lord said, like as my servant Isaiah hath walked naked and barefoot 3 years for a sign and a wonder upon Egypt and upon Ethiopia, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptians prisoners, and the Ethiopians captives, young and old, naked and barefoot, even with their buttocks uncovered, to the shame of Egypt. So, God told Isaiah to walk naked and barefoot for 3 years. Was this about Isaiah? No. It was a parable, wasn't it? And the point behind what Isaiah was doing, God wanted to make a statement about Egypt and Ethiopia. Okay? But he told Isaiah, walk naked and barefoot. It was a graphic teaching lesson of what was to happen to Egypt and Assyria. And Isaiah was the guinea pig. Isaiah was the one that God used to teach this lesson by actually living it out, by actually representing it in his own experience. So some parables were lived. Here's another one. No, I didn't give you the other one, but you can remember the other one where Ezekiel was told to use human dung and cook his food. And he was told to lie on his side for 40 days and then lie on the other side for 300 and something days as a sign of what would happen to the Israelites. So God always, even in the Old Testament, was always using parables, illustrations. It's his favorite teaching tool. And having been a teacher, Right, Marsha? I can understand why. One of the things they stress most of all for teachers is use charts, use illustrations, get the student involved in what they are doing. Because I'm talking to you here now. But if I give you a picture, it's 6 more. Yeah. And if I get you to come up here and do something, you won't forget it. Yeah. So God, as the master teacher, was always using this kind of method. But Jesus gave us another reason, an interesting reason. In Matthew 13, verses 10 to 13, it says, And the disciples came and said unto him, Why speakest thou unto them in parables? He answered and said unto them, Because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. For whosoever hath, to him shall be given, and he shall have more abundance. But whosoever hath not, from him shall be taken away even that he hath. Therefore speak I to them in parables, because they seeing see not, and hearing they hear not, neither do they understand. It seems like Jesus is saying to me, I'm speaking in parables so that they won't understand. Isn't it kind of amazing? And yet I can perfectly understand, because I'm going to tell you something. You see, when somebody comes and tells me that they can't understand the Bible, you know what I know? I know that they don't have a spiritual desire. Because you see, if you have a relationship with God and you have a spiritual desire for Him, you will understand, because He will teach you. Now, what He's saying is that the lessons that pertain to life are for those who will dig to find them. So I'm writing it, I'm expressing it in forms and symbols so that the careless and those who want an easy life won't be able to obtain it. Parables, in other words, is God using a means of separating between those who are sincere and those who are not. Okay? I always get upset when I hear people criticizing the Bible and criticizing God, even when I don't fully have the answer, but it makes me go and search. I always get upset because I know that I'm dealing with people who are attacking what they don't understand and they're not trying to understand. That's why I don't have much sympathy. There's a forum that I get on sometimes on Facebook, and there are atheists who come on all the time and they criticize the Bible. You know what hurts me? The guy in charge of the forum is a Christian, supposed, an Adventist, and he's always taking the side of the atheists. Right. I wrong him. Because the fact that he is so ignorant that he doesn't have the answers, even as a Christian, you should defend Christianity. But instead he's supporting what the atheists are saying. You know, because so I'm saying, parables, Jesus says parables are written for people like this. Okay? Now the key to understanding the Old Testament, this is what I believe the Lord has finally brought to my mind. The key to understanding it, and you might have already suspected where I'm going. Galatians 3:23-25 says, But before faith came, we were kept under the law. Shut up unto the faith which should afterwards be revealed. Wherefore the law was our schoolmaster, to bring us unto Christ, that we might be justified by faith. But after that faith is come, we are no longer under a schoolmaster. Well, it says it was intended to bring us to the place where we are justified. But it's more than justified. It was intended to be, you see, I understand that in Bible times, the schoolmaster was not just an instructor who wrote things on the board. He was more like a governor. Have you ever heard that? They say the word is pedagogos. And it was like a governor that he not only taught the children, he carried them around from place to place. So he made sure that they were reared properly. The law then, or that system that existed back then, was God's way of controlling and teaching certain lessons to people until they came to a certain place. The entire Old Testament system, all its rules, penalties, system of government, even the historical record, were established as a great model, a teaching tool. Well, I need to clarify that. I need to explain that. What I mean is that the greatest parable of all is the Old Testament. The greatest parable ever told, the greatest parable that God ever told is the Old Testament. I'm going to suggest to you that the Old Testament is not the truth. It is a representation of truth. Okay? That's a big thing, but I'm going to explain myself. All right? When I say it's not the truth, I mean everything that happened there, it did happen. It is true in that sense. But it's not the truth about what God is like, about God's intent and God's motives. It's a parable. And what did we say about parables? They are sometimes lived. Okay? And parables are not necessarily the truth that you are looking at. They are there to do what? Teach you some greater lesson. All right? Let's see how we can apply this to the Old Testament. It is not told, it is lived. It is an acted parable, like a play or a movie. All right, when you go to a movie or you go to a play, you see them shoot somebody. What do you expect after the play? You're going to see him standing around the back. It's not the truth. It is represented that way, but it is not the truth. Okay? But in the movie, it is true. But afterwards, you see the person alive and he's well, and you realize, okay, it was just an act. I'm suggesting to you that the Old Testament is an acted parable, like a play or a movie. And I'm going to back up myself a little bit more. The elements are not true, but they are acted out to teach some lesson. And you know, maybe God was the only one who knew that it was only a play. All right? But I'm going to demonstrate what I'm saying to you that I think I can convince most of us. See what Paul says. Now, all these things happen unto them for what? What's another word for ensample? Examples. These things were examples, Paul says. All these things happen unto them for ensamples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. The entire Old Testament system, he says it happened to them. Why? As examples. God wanted to give examples. He wanted to teach lessons, and he gave the whole system to teach these examples. And I know it may not seem like that's exactly what it is saying, but I will back up myself as we continue. The meaning of the Old Testament parable, and this is the point where now, this is my punchline. There are two systems that exist, and most of us kind of understand because we have been around for several years, right? But there's a system of natural law, and there's a system of legal law. The true law of life is a system of natural law, and it is based on actions and consequences. Legal law is not the true law of life. It's a reflection of the true law. It's based upon actions and penalties. Notice the two things. Consequences versus penalties. Legal law. He that smiteth a man so that he die shall be surely put to death. If you transgress, it brings a penalty. Who kills you? Who kills you? The executioner. Another man kills you. And why does he kill you? It's because the law says you are to be killed. So he kills you, right? That's legal law. Here's the true law of the universe. Natural law. Now, this is, I understand, is a formula for gravity. I don't know. I found it on the internet, right? Now, does it say that somebody is to be taken and thrown on his head if he jumps? It says nothing like that. It's just an expression of how the thing works. Okay? Yet if you drop from a high enough height and you drop, you're going to die. Nobody sentences you to die. If you are stupid enough to jump from a high cliff, you're going to die. Nobody says, chop off his head because he broke the law and he jumped from the cliff. There's no law that says, thou shalt not jump. But gravity says, natural law says, if you jump, you are going to die. This is the true law of the universe. God designed the universe to run by natural law. And it's true in the spiritual just as in the physical world. There are natural laws that govern everything. What does the Bible say about the spiritual law? Whatsoever man soweth what? That shall he also reap. Is that God or is that nature? It's a system. It's how the system was designed to work. God made this law and built it into the way the universe works. Whatever a man sows, that shall he also reap. I mean, Howard was kind of touching on it a little bit this morning. But this is maybe looking a little further into it. In natural law, transgression brings a consequence. In legal law, transgression brings a penalty. Where legal law is concerned, you have to have a man to carry out the sentence, right? You have to have government, you have to have rules and regulations, and you have to have somebody to carry out the sentences. Natural law doesn't work like that. I'm saying that the true law of life is natural law. Here's an example of natural law and legal law. Legal law says that if you sin, you must do what? Take a lamb and kill the lamb. But natural law, God put a principle in place where through the death of his son or through the life of his son, life may come into me. People think God sacrificed his son to kill him because God required blood. You know why? Because they are still under the legal mindset. They don't understand when Jesus died, what God was doing. He was providing life for the human race. I can obtain that life, and that life in me, as Paul says, the law of the Spirit of life does what? It makes me free from the law of sin and death. He put something inside of me to make me free, to make me born again. That's how I am saved from sin. Not because some animal is killed on an altar. Not because Jesus' blood was shed on the cross. His shed blood on the cross provided life. It was what was involved in that whole process. It was a natural process. It wasn't legal so much. So, here's what I'm saying. The Old Testament was a legal representation of the system of natural law which governs the universe. And I'm going to explain. It is a graphic representation of how sin works. All right. If you understand that, you begin to sympathize with what was happening in the Old Testament. Let me ask you something. Achan. Okay, take Achan for example. Okay. Achan takes a golden wedge and hides it under his tent. One man in the congregation, right? What's the condition of God's people? They are on fire because the power of God is working among them and they are beating all their enemies. One man in the congregation, he likes the ways of Babylon, right? He takes the Babylonian garment and hides it under his tent, and he gets a goodly wedge of gold and puts it under his tent. What is God saying? How does that apply? I mean, God says, kill him, right? But it's an expression, it's teaching us about how natural law works. What he's saying is that if in your congregation, one person has his heart on Babylon, it will affect the state of the entire body. It will affect the state of the entire body. There's no other lesson that God was trying to make. What he's saying is that unbelief in one person can affect everybody. Not can, will affect everybody. And all the other story. Jonathan. Okay? Saul made this stupid vow. Okay? Jonathan didn't know. Jonathan went ahead and took a little honey and tasted it. And he says, now I must die. What is God trying to say? God is saying, whether you know or not, sin will affect you. Give you an example. Okay? You don't know that a lady or a man has AIDS, right? And you live carelessly and you get involved with this person. Does it matter that you don't know? No. Nature don't ask if you're ignorant or you're knowledgeable. Nature does not ask. You wake up a few months later with AIDS and nature does not care. Nature is cold and heartless. It has no sympathy. It doesn't care for feelings. It doesn't care for... You say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. Nature doesn't care. And that is the way natural law works. And I'm saying natural law is how God designed the universe to operate. The Old Testament was God expressing the truth in legal terms. Why was the system so exacting and merciless? God set up a teaching system to represent sin's consequences. Therefore, he had to be faithful in representing those consequences accurately. All right? If I'm teaching you a lesson, and I'm saying, if you touch this, you're going to die. And I'm going to try to show you a way to represent it. I can't allow you to touch it and live, because I'm destroying my lesson. When God laid down certain principles to make the lessons graphic and true, he had to live by them. These are the sons of Aaron, Nadab and Abihu. They went and offered strange fire in the temple, and what happened? Fire came out and destroyed them. What is God saying? If you approach God with strange fire, you are going to die. And I'm not saying God is going to kill you. I'm going to say the way nature works, you are going to die. The person who approaches God with strange fire, when I say strange fire, I mean you have a strange spirit, right? Because the fire represents a spirit. You have a strange spirit. It must be Satan's spirit. The man who comes to worship God with a satanic spirit, that very fact is going to end up in your destruction. God doesn't have to destroy you. That very fact is going to destroy you. And it begins to explain now. Well, I hate this. I don't like this picture, but I mean, it kind of illustrates what I'm saying. Nature and consequences have no mercy. All of us would do anything in our power to help a little child like this. Okay? Wouldn't we? And yet this happens every day, all over the world. Because consequences don't care. Nature does not care. And this is what God was trying to express in the whole Old Testament system. He was showing you how consequences, how law works, how natural law works, and he was representing it through the legal system. See why? He says in Deuteronomy 13 and verse 5, just the last part of that verse. When God said, if a man was a prophet or a dreamer and he was giving false dreams, he says the person should be killed, right? And he says, why? So shalt thou put away the evil from the midst of thee. Now, God says the homosexual must die. Okay? Why? Instantly. Once you found a man sleeping with another man, he says kill him right away. Once you found a man committing adultery with his neighbor's wife, kill him immediately. Once a boy cursed his mother or father, kill him same time. Once a person broke the Sabbath, kill him immediately. Why? Consequences. And it made me think. It made me think because I never realized that Sabbath breaking can have that kind of consequence. God is saying to you that if you allow these things to increase in your society, the society is going to be destroyed. So he says, stop it immediately. The first time you see it, stop it. Don't allow it to grow by 1 degree, because if you do, it's going to destroy the society. So stop it immediately. The first time you find an adulterer, it wasn't everything that had a death sentence. Fornication didn't have a death sentence, but adultery did. Bestiality did. Homosexuality did. Murder did. Sabbath breaking did. Idolatry and witchcraft did. If you go through and look at those that carry the death sentence, what God is saying, why didn't he say all sin, death sentence? Because don't we think all sin is the same sin? Well, all sin might eventually make you lost, but not all sin has the same effect on the church or on society. There are certain sins that God knows that if they are allowed to increase in the society, it's going to destroy the society. And it makes me think hard about things like the Sabbath, because I realize that people take Sabbath breaking lightly. But God was actually saying that if you disregard the Sabbath, you are going to do so much damage to your own soul, you'll eventually kill yourself. That's what he's actually saying, you know. Yes, Tracy.
I'm going to be very quick.
Yes.
I understand the consequence of what you're saying, because as you are pointing out, these sins have a ripple effect. It can cause more harm to the persons around and towards centuries. But use the one remembering with David, right? When you remember the children of Israel, and then 70,000 persons died because of the pestilence. Explain to me, because it's like God directly did something. He asked him to choose from 3 things. And the pestilence wasn't because they were doing some strange thing and caused the pestilence to be there. God did it. Right. And when you see these 70,000 people, what about their soul?
I'm coming to that part, the part about the souls I'm coming to. But what I will say, and I don't say I have all the answers, but here's what I would say. I would say that when we depend upon human strength, we are going to suffer. And we can look at it from the perspective of a congregation or us individually. What God is saying is that when you begin to depend upon human strength, you are going to lose numbers. You're going to lose Whatever benefits you would have obtained, you are going to lose them, whether in your personal life or in a congregation. So it's really a warning against putting our dependence upon how many of us. It's seeing things from a human perspective instead of God's perspective. It ultimately is going to end up in negative consequences, is what I think he's saying. But I'll come to the other part of the question in just a moment. I mean, I just wanted to throw in something here that's not directly related, but it's interesting. It's indirectly related. But the whole system, somebody touched this yesterday. It was Janusz or Vlad. But it says, Deuteronomy 6 and verse 25, it shall be our righteousness if we observe to do all these commandments before the Lord our God, as he hath commanded us. What does Isaiah 64 say about our righteousnesses? They are like filthy rags. But in that system, their righteousness was to do all these commandments. Let me show you something. Look at this man, David. The Lord rewarded me according to my righteousness. Man, this was the man after God's own heart. The cleanness of my hands, according to the cleanness of my hands, hath he recompensed me. For I have kept the ways of the Lord, and I have not wickedly departed from my God. For all his judgments were before me, and as for his statutes, I did not depart from them. I was also upright before him, and have kept myself from mine iniquity. Therefore the Lord hath recompensed me according to my righteousness, according to my cleanness in his eyesight. How would you describe a person like this? What word would you use? Self-righteous. This is self-righteousness. Okay. I'm going to come down to David, who spoke about his righteousness. I want you to look at David's statement. 1 Kings 2 verse 5 and 6. This is David's deathbed, you know. He's on his deathbed. He says, moreover, thou knowest also what Joab the son of Zeruiah did to me, and what he did to the two captains of the host of Israel, unto Abner the son of Ner, unto Amasa the son of Jephthah, whom he slew, and shed the blood of war in peace, and put the blood of war upon his girdle that was about his loins, and in his shoes that were on his feet. Do therefore according to thy wisdom, and let not his whorehead go down to the grave in peace. Joab was David's general. Now Joab killed Abner in cold blood, and he killed Amasa in cold blood. David never punished him. But when David was dying, he said to his son Solomon, look here, remember what Joab did. Don't let him die in peace. David said, the Lord rewarded me according to my righteousness, right? That is what he died with. Look at this one. When David was being pursued by his son Absalom, a man named Shimei came and threw a stone after him and said, you go up, you bloody man. And one of David's cousins, Abishai, he said, let me go and take off this dog's head. And David said, you sons of Zeruiah are too hard for me. The Lord has told him to curse David. Let him curse, because even my own son is against me. All right, when David was coming back now, victorious, the same man come out and with dirt on his head and beg David to forgive him. And David says, all right, I forgive you. Okay, so he forgave him. Now look at what he says when he's dying. Look at what he tells Solomon. And behold, thou hast with thee Shimei the son of Gera, a Benjamite of Bahurim, which cursed me with a grievous curse in the day when I went to Mahanaim. But he came down to meet me at Jordan, and I swear to him by the Lord, saying, I will not put thee to death with a sword. Now therefore, hold him not guiltless. For thou art a wise man, and knowest what thou oughtest to do unto him. But his whorehead bring thou down to the grave with blood. That's the man that David saying forgive. Okay? Right. Now, the point I'm making is this, okay? David's righteousness was based on the law. David is not going to be saved because of his righteousness. He's going to be saved because of his faith, and Christ's righteousness imputed because of his faith, right? David was a man after God's own heart because of his faith, not because of his deeds. Because David said, I hate my enemies with a perfect hatred. David didn't have the Spirit of Christ. Nobody back then had the Spirit of Christ, because Christ had not yet come and provided that Spirit. But they had faith, and they will be saved because of their faith. But you can see this righteousness of the law. When you live by the law is cold and heartless. Okay, and that is what David was living by. This was perfectly right in terms of the law. It was right to kill babies, slaughter babies in terms of the law. Okay, when God gave these instructions, he never said, just spare the little ones 1 day old and so. No. the system, and I'm going to explain finally now, because this is the point I'm making in response to Tracy's question. Death under the law did not mean eternal death, not necessarily. That is the final important point I want to make, and I'm going to prove it. Here's one. Here's a man who died because of disobedience. He died because of disobedience. And the Lord said unto him, this is the land which I swear unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob, saying, I will give it unto thy seed. I have caused thee to see it with thine eyes, but they shall not go over thither. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, even against Beth Peor. But no man knoweth of his sepulchre unto this day. And Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was not dim, nor his natural force abated. What does that mean? Yeah. So who killed him? God killed him. The only person there when Moses died was God. And God killed him, his servant and his friend, because of Moses' sin. He died under judgment for sin. And Moses was the first man resurrected. Okay? So, what I'm saying is that don't look at all the killings in the Old Testament and think that that is the end of the story. Like you go to a play and see people being killed. What do you expect after the play? They're there at the end, right? They're there around the back because they were a part of a parable. And at the end we are going to see the truth. I'm not saying all of them are going to be saved, but at the end, after the judgment, we are going to see that some who were sentenced to die under the system will inherit eternal life. Moses is one. I personally believe the disobedient prophet will be another one. You know about the disobedient prophet, right? God sent him to warn Jeroboam and said, don't eat anything in this place. And when he was going home, an old lying prophet ran after him and said, I also am a prophet. And God told me to tell you to come and eat with me. He turned back with the old liar. And when he got there and he was eating, the same lying prophet said, jump up and said, thus saith the Lord, because you have disobeyed the Lord, you will not reach back home alive. And on the way home, a lion killed him, and the lion didn't even touch his donkey. Okay? Killed him and didn't even eat his body, just stood over him. So, this man, I don't expect this man to be lost. You know, but God is teaching the lesson. There's a lesson there to be learned, and the lesson has to be taught. What about Uzzah? Uzzah is another one that I say, I'm going to wait until heaven to find out what happened to Uzzah, because I believe Uzzah was trying to do... I mean, if I am here beside something and I see it start to fall, I'm going to just try to stop it, right? Naturally. It's an instinct, right? Now, some people might explain it otherwise, but in my mind, God was saying, the way I have ordained things, the way I've laid out things, are to be strictly observed, because the result will be death. Not that I, God, will kill you, but if you disregard sacred things, you will die. Look here, that lesson, I would like the brethren here who are here today to really have sink into you. Because in many things we are careless about spiritual things. In many things we don't give much regard to. You know, it's like God is almost trivial to some people. But the lesson that I see as I look at the Old Testament is that God is saying that if you treat sacred things, if you treat the things of God with little regard, the result is that it's going to kill you. Your attitude is going to kill you. Not that God is going to destroy you. Your attitude is going to kill you. And when your attitude kills you, there's going to be no compromise, because nature does not care. If you find the spiritual life going down, you hardly want to come to worship anymore, maybe there's a reason. Maybe you're not treating the Sabbath with enough respect. Maybe you're not treating sacred things with enough respect, and you wonder, why is your spirit going down? You think God is abandoning you? It's a consequence of the way you have chosen. Now, the last thing I'm going to say is that under this system, under the new covenant where we're dealing with real things, there is one way that consequences can be turned around. All right? So it's wonderful, because if you get involved and you pick up AIDS, naturally you're going to die. But under the new covenant, there is a way that consequences can change. Yes, Tamasha. Miracles. When consequences are turned around, it's called a miracle. Okay? And miracles are available for those who have faith. Okay? But when you adopt wrong principles and consequences begin to take place in your life, the problem is that it needs a miracle to turn you around. But without faith, you can't obtain a miracle. And because you have adopted wrong principles, your faith doesn't exist. So, well, you could be dead, but you might be able to get somebody to pray for you. All right? So I'm saying, in any case, what I'm saying is, it's stupid to take risks with the things that you know God wants. Because ultimately, what I see as I look at the Old Testament is that we will destroy ourselves if we don't live by these principles. And I mean, when I say destroy ourselves, I mean the most frightening thing is how uncompromising these things were. That's the lesson, you know. That's the lesson. It's not like when others touch the ark, God says, well, okay, I know you were trying to do something good. You won't die. No! God was so uncompromising because that is the way natural law is. You disrespect sacred things. You allow homosexuality to increase in your society. Look here. That's why I know this world is at its end. When certain things are accepted as normal, what God was trying to say back then are going to be seen in clarity. It's the destruction of society. So, I think that's where I'm going to stop, and I say God bless you all, and I thank you for listening.